Hey everyone,
Hey guys.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about all things recruiter pay. It's a question that we get pretty often. I've been talking about the last two videos that we were going to make a video eventually about this. I wrote an article on it a couple months ago, that's why it's been on my mind. But we get questions a lot from either therapists that are thinking about becoming a recruiter. It's no secret right now that therapists don't really want to work a lot of clinical roles. There's a high interest in non-clinical roles, and because of that, a recruiter is a likely avenue that some therapists think about going down. And the other thing is people often think that recruiters make a ton of money and that they're keeping a lot of money from the therapist, and there's some animosity there. So we get questions about it pretty often. So we want to talk about how recruiter pay works, how it's structured, how much they make, all of those questions you guys might have, and then also we'll answer any questions that you have at the end. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and I'm going to get this video shared in a few different groups.
All right, for those of you guys that may not know us, my name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We're the faces behind Travel Therapy Mentor. Many of you guys may have tuned in for our videos in the past. We've been travel PTs for over 8 years now, and we've been making videos for, probably the past 5 or 6 years on our Travel Therapy Mentor page. If you are new to our channel, then welcome. We appreciate having you here. For those of you that have been following us for a while and you saw us make a post about this video last week or earlier this week, so sorry about the delay on getting this video up. It's kind of unusual for us to be doing a video on a Wednesday night. Typically we try to do them on Sundays, but unfortunately we both got really sick over the weekend, kind of started feeling bad a little bit on Saturday, and it got way worse on Sunday. So we just kind of unfortunately have kept pushing this video back. We're still actually not 100%. I don't know if you can tell, but we're still a little bit stuffed up. But we're on the mend, getting better. So we were like, I thought about pushing it back one more time, but I was like, we can't keep pushing this video back. We'll just go ahead and do it like we said on Wednesday. So sorry about that, guys. In other news, we are getting married in 2 weeks. And so I'm like, okay, well, at least if we were going to get sick, it was now. So I'm hoping that we'll be fully better by like the end of this week. Actually, tomorrow is my birthday, so I'm really hoping to be better tomorrow for my birthday, and really just hoping to stay well through our wedding coming up and then our honeymoon. So thoughts and prayers are appreciated for that. If you guys want to send all the good vibes our way. To feel better. We just got back from a little short trip to Colorado, and we kind of feel like we got sick after Colorado. I don't know if it was just the travel or the airport or being around a lot of people or what it was. I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but we feel like in the last couple of years, after having isolated a lot during the beginning of COVID, it seems like whenever we go on trips or we're like around a big group of people, we get sick a lot more easy. And I don't know if our immunity just got really screwed up with COVID and all that, but anyway, long story short, we've been sick, and fingers crossed we're not going to be sick for the wedding and for the honeymoon, but stay tuned on that. So as Jared mentioned, he is sharing the video in a couple of groups so that more people can tune in with us live. If you are watching live, we'd love if you'd say hello in the comments. Let us know who you are. Are you a therapist? Are you a student? Are you a recruiter? Do we have any recruiters on live tonight? Let us know in the comments. Shout out to those of you that will listen later. I know some of you guys will listen later on our podcast or on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys, or sometimes on the Facebook replay. But yeah, and then one other announcement I also wanted to make before we dive into tonight's topic. So we are going to be running a sale for Memorial Day weekend on our travel therapy course. So many of you guys may know that a few years ago we put out a comprehensive travel therapy course. It's titled Becoming a Financially Successful Travel Therapist. And this was a culmination of years of our research and knowledge and experience. Having put out hundreds of articles and videos over the years, we decided to just kind of put together one resource. It's 12 hours worth of video lessons with additional reading materials and downloadable guides. And it's a one-stop shop to teach you exactly how to get started as a travel therapist, and then also how to use travel therapy to become financially successful, to save, to invest for your future. It's no secret, we've talked about all the time, that we achieved financial independence through travel therapy, and we now only work part-time as physical therapists. We don't work full-time anymore, and that was after only 3 years of working full-time as travelers. So we teach you everything that we know in this course, and we're going to be running a sale for 40% off. this weekend. So if you have been thinking about the course, if you have been thinking about getting started with travel therapy, this weekend will be a great time to get a really big discount on our course. So get enrolled in that. We'll be announcing it via our email list and also social media this weekend.
Okay, so talking about recruiter pay, like I said, if you guys have any questions or any of this doesn't make sense, feel free to ask and we will answer those. I saw Nick said happy 16th birthday. It's very nice.
Shout out to those of you guys that are watching live. Hi, Laura. Hi, Patty. Patty says she's an OT. Nick, happy 16th birthday. Actually, I'll be 33, but thanks, Nick. Allie says, take care. Thanks, Allie. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Hannah. Let's see. Thomas. Hey, Jody. Thank you guys for tuning in live. Anybody else who's watching live, we would love if you'd say hi in the comments.
Okay, so like we've talked about before, we have interviewed over 100 recruiters now. We currently work with about 50 that we send leads to regularly. We've got about, 12 or 13 companies we send leads to?
About 12.
So we've talked to a ton of recruiters and managers, and we've learned a lot of this information from talking to them over the years. Now, it's a little bit weird, obviously, asking about someone's pay directly. So a lot of this is just like, discussing how pay is structured, and some will share that information. So we do know what some of the recruiters make, but we don't go out of our way to ask, like, how much do you make per year? So some of this is based on firsthand knowledge from what recruiters tell us. Some of it's based on what managers say that recruiters make, base salaries, things like that. So in general, though, I think people overestimate, travel therapists overestimate how much recruiters make on average. While it is true that some of the top-end recruiters make a lot of money, there are recruiters that make multiple six figures. That percentage is probably less than 1%. I would say people making over $200,000 a year as a recruiter, less than 1%. Most recruiters are making probably in the $50,000 to $70,000 a year range, maybe 60 to 80, like somewhere around there. And that pay is structured kind of uniquely, and it depends on the company. Every company does things a little bit differently. There are over 100 companies out there that staff therapists, and all of them have different base pay, different tiered structures on how they set up pay. So there's a lot of variation, but we just wanted to cover how it works in general.
Yeah, so from what we've gathered over the years, again, kind of just in talking to dozens of different recruiters and company managers and owners, they all do it a little bit differently, but the majority of the companies that we've spoken to about it basically will pay the recruiter a base salary, which might be somewhere around like 30 to 50,000 or so a year. And then they also get commissions on top of that based on the number of therapists that they place. And it was generally our assumption back in the beginning that a lot of them were making money based on how much of the bill rate they kept from the therapists. And so we kind of always thought, and I think a lot of therapists think that like, oh, if they keep more from our pay packages, then they make more. And so then therefore they're incentivized to keep more, right? And so it turns out that actually that's not always the case, that has a little bit to do with it, but it's usually structured a little bit different than that.
Yeah, and it depends on the company. There are some where they do make more depending on how much of the margin they keep. Normally the way it is, though, most of the companies that we've talked to, they'll have a base pay, like Whitney said, that's usually going to be around $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And then there is a tiered commission structure based on how many travelers that recruiter has on assignment at a time. And it might be something like for the first 5 travelers that they have on assignment, they keep like 5% of this is all just made up numbers, but they keep like 5% of the margin. So that's the amount of the bill rate that the company keeps as profit. They would keep 5% of that. And then for the next 5 to 15 or 5 to 20, then they keep 10%. And then from 20 to 40, they keep 20%. And it's a tiered structure like that. So, and in some cases, some of the companies, the amount of margin they keep for the company, so the amount of profit they're able to keep for the company, factors into how much they earn. Whereas a lot of companies, the way it works is they just have like a percentage that they need to shoot for on average. And it doesn't affect their pay. It's just that if they go below that, then they start getting questions from managers. So a lot of times they're not incentivized to keep more, but if they don't keep enough, then they can get in trouble. So, they're, of course, as a recruiter, they do have to keep, a certain amount, and there's some wiggle room in how much they can keep. But you have to remember that there's always an incentive, but it's usually not as high of as an incentive as you think it is.
Yeah, and that was the big difference that we learned is like, obviously the companies, in order to stay profitable, the staffing companies will have like standards where they're like, oh, you're supposed to keep about 20 to 25% of the bill rate aside for the company to have its operating costs and all that. And, in some cases, I'm sure that there are incentives for them to be like hitting closer to the higher end of that number for the company's sake. But on the flip side, there's a big incentive for the recruiter to give you their best offer in order to keep you longer and keep you happy. So a lot of the recruiters that we've worked with for a really long time will tend to give us on the lower end of those margins or try to give us a better deal because they want to keep us happy and keep us traveling with them for a longer time. And that's more important to them on the recruiter level, because the longer term relationships they can have with travelers, the easier their jobs are. Like if they can just keep the same traveler and get them assignment after assignment after assignment, they have to do so much less work than just churning and burning travelers every time and having to build new relationships each time and go out and find new travelers all the time. They would rather keep a little bit less to keep the traveler happy and have that longevity.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So just to recap the numbers real quick, base pay usually 40 to 50,000, depends on the company. Some are a little lower. I don't think there's many much higher than that. And then an additional bonus based on some sort of tiered commission structure for almost all companies. There are some that pay just a flat rate dollar amount per contract that they book, but that's more rare. So normally companies want to incentivize the recruiters to get as many people placed as possible. So they step up the tiers as it goes to incentivize them to get a lot of people on contract. Average pay somewhere in the 50 to 70 range for most recruiters. High end, there's people making over 350,000 a year, but that is very rare. I would say, especially newer recruiters, they're mainly just making that base pay, and they're trying to build up their caseload, and they're working really hard, making a lot of cold calls, getting turned down all the time. So for people that are considering becoming a recruiter, you have to remember that the beginning is pretty tough. You're going to make less than you make as a therapist, and you're going to have to really hustle to try to build connections and try to get things rolling. And because of that, there's a lot of turnover with recruiters, and we see that very often. And in fact, we won't work with a recruiter now that hasn't been in the industry for at least a year, but usually even more than that, because we've seen so many come and go. And they might seem really great. They talk on the phone really great, and they understand the industry, and they've placed a lot of people, but it's really difficult to get past that first year for some reason. And I think that has to do with how much hustle you have to put in as a recruiter in the beginning. I think once you get past that hurdle, especially if you're a good salesperson, you're good on the phone, then you can really excel, I guess. And there's some recruiters that are really great with it, and there's some that just never really take off. And some are fine to just kind of hang around that base commission, not place that many people. If they do, great. If they don't, it's not a big deal. Whereas others really hustle. And our top recruiters, they're working a lot of hours. They're working at least usually 60 hours a week, and some more than that. And even when they're not working, they're still answering text messages from travelers with issues and things like that. So it's a very demanding job. And I think sometimes travelers overlook how difficult of a job it is. They think like, oh, I see what my recruiter does. It's not a big deal. They find me a job. But think about if you had 50 travelers on assignment, how often you would have issues. And there are some recruiters that have 70 or 80 travelers on assignment at a time. There's some that have over 100 travelers on assignment. And think about how often you have issues on contracts, and then multiply that by 100 and think about getting text messages about that all the time. It's a difficult job, and that's why there's a lot of turnover.
Yeah, I just want to take a step back and just talk a little bit about the job of a recruiter, because we've learned so much over the last 8 years. When we were new grads and we got into it, I don't really remember exactly what I thought a travel therapy recruiter was, but I think that I thought they had a lot more to do with healthcare and a lot less to do with like sales or anything like that. Like I didn't understand that in essence it's a sales role. I thought it was way more of like a healthcare management kind of role, like someone that is in the healthcare industry, someone that I've met that works in an office at a hospital or works in the back office at a PT clinic. But over the years, what I've learned when I've met a lot of new recruiters and I say like, well, how did you get into this? So many of them come from working in like retail or sales of some other sort, or they just like found the job on Indeed or LinkedIn or something because they thought like, oh, sales, there's an opportunity to make commission and move up. And I was like, oh, weird. It's weird that you think of like us as like sales. You're like trying to sell us. We're like the product.
We are like the product. Yeah.
And so I definitely don't want to like deter you from working with a newer recruiter, because we have met some newer recruiters who do a really great job because they are really excited. They have a lot more time on their hands. They aren't as busy, and maybe they're really willing to like work and hustle hard. However, the reason that we've kind of set this rule of like wait until they've been there a year is because we've just seen so many of them turn over because they got into it for the wrong reasons. They got into it because they were like, oh, commissions, money, tiers, sales. I could be making so much more. I might not even have a degree. I might not even have a bachelor's degree. I might have no degree at all. And I could just go straight out of high school or have an associate's or have a bachelor's in some other unrelated thing. And suddenly my ceiling is unlimited. I can just make all this money. And so some of them go into it for this reason, but then they don't come into it with the right mentality. Whereas all of our recruiters that, who knows, maybe that back then they started for the same reason. And that's fine. Like you have to have an incentive to want to do a job, right? But all of our ones that we've known that have been there for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 15 years, we've got some recruiters that have been working in this industry more than 15 years. They've come to know and realize that like the balance between the sales role and the customer service role is really important, and they value more the customer service and the relationships that they've built over time. And these are all the people who, like when Jared wrote this article, all of our friends that are recruiters now that we've grown to know and like over the years, were like, yes, like thank you for telling our side of the story, and that like it's not that easy of a job, and that the really good recruiters value the relationships. And it's true, like that's what they all tell us. And we know just from having like built relationships with them over the years that they'll go out of their way to do stuff for us that we know they wouldn't have done when we were new travelers. They'll go out of their way to like talk to the manager and lower the margin and submit us instead of submit one of their other travelers and things like that. So the ones that like stay in it for longer, they're actually going to give you a much better deal because they want to have a good relationship with you. So yeah, just a little bit about like that. That's kind of the role of the recruiter.
Yeah, and that relationship aspect is extremely important. And that's something we did not realize probably until just a couple years ago, which is kind of crazy. We've traveled all this time. We had a business 6 years ago, but we still didn't really understand this. And it wasn't until we started working with we've expanded a lot in the last few years, and we've interviewed a lot more recruiters and found some really, really great ones. And what we've learned from pretty much all the good ones is that it's more about relationships than it is about sales. And I think the people that don't succeed or in it for short-term gain, they never realize that. And they are just trying to take high margins, and they're just trying to basically take advantage of therapists. And what happens is the word gets around. The travel therapy world is very small. The travel healthcare world in general is very small, but travel therapy is just a small portion of it. And so if you have a recruiter that keeps too much of the bill rate, they keep a high margin on a contract just because they might make an extra $20 a week or something, they're really hurting themselves. Because if you figure that out and you tell your friends, and then your friends tell friends, well, instead of then having you as a traveler for a long period of time, 2 or 3 years, I think most travelers probably travel somewhere between 2 and 3 years. Instead of having you for that whole time, well, now you work one contract or maybe 2 contracts, and then you never work with that person again. That's short-sighted on the recruiter's part. The really good recruiters understand that. They want to give the traveler the best deal they possibly can, and they want to form a long-term relationship because ultimately it makes them more money. It's in their best interest to do that. Because if you take 6 contracts with them and they keep a low margin, they're going to make way more money than if you take 2 contracts and they keep a high margin. It's more about longevity and keeping travelers around.
Yeah.
And that's something we did not understand, but now it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and not just for you as an individual. Like, yes, they definitely want to keep you around, but also if they're a really great recruiter, you might tell your friends. They'll get referrals, and word gets around. Like, there's a ton of Facebook groups and Reddit forums and stuff where people are asking about good recruiters, and if people really love their recruiter, they'll throw their name out there. If people really hate their recruiter, they'll bash them in these groups, or they'll leave a really bad review, online. It's really in their best interest to serve their travelers well, so that word gets around on the positive side and not the negative side. They want those good reviews online, and they want word of mouth to spread that they're a good recruiter, because that's going to keep them in this industry for 10 plus years if they want, rather than just like a year and now they're going to go find a new job.
Yeah, so for any recruiters watching, or for any therapists thinking about getting into recruiting, you have to realize that make connections, form these relationships. That's what's going to make you money in the long term. It's not going to be, we've seen companies and recruiters come and go where they just basically kind of prey on new travelers, and they pay them very low, and they keep a lot of the money, and they never last. Like, they probably do make good money in the very beginning, but then who does it help if you're only in the industry for 1 year? So, yeah, a lot of the best recruiters, they know that, and they focus on relationships. They're not trying to take advantage of you. They're trying to give you a fair deal so that you stay with them, and that helps you and it helps them.
Yeah. Something else about if you're somebody who's thinking about leaving clinical care, if you're a therapist who's like, maybe being a recruiter would be a good role for me, a non-clinical role. Since COVID, we saw a lot of therapists leave clinical roles and go into being healthcare recruiters. And it worked out for some of them, but it did not work out for all of them. Because
I would say it didn't work out for the majority. And the reason is because therapists already make a good amount of money.
Well, there's that. So like, for one, some of them think like, oh, I'll make the same or more, which may or may not be the case. But also it's just a very different skill set. And I think that a lot of therapists just think like, well, I understand like the clinical side of things, so I can talk to the travelers and I'll relate really well with them. And that part of it you will do really well with. But some therapists get into it and are like, oh, this is a desk job. I don't want a desk job. Like, I don't want to be at my computer all the time. I don't want to have to be available for phone calls night and day and weekends, and deal with all this like behind the scenes stuff. And you have to be very organized, and you have to have computer skills. And like, I mean, obviously most of us have like some level of computer skills, but there might be some skills that like you weren't really using as a clinician. And now you're like, oh, I need to like use Excel and like use all these programs. And so it's not the same skill set as being a therapist. And some people end up enjoying the change of pace, and they're like, oh, I'm ready for more of like a desk job environment. But some people get into it and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. And like, also sometimes it's a really hard job because people are really mean to you. When you have to be the one like making cold calls and stuff, people can be really rude to you on the phone. Other therapists and stuff, like, I mean, really mean to you, and then you're gonna be the one on the flip side of it, where the therapist is telling you, you're taking advantage of me, and you're just trying to keep all the money, and you're just a headhunter, and I need to give her the bill rate, and I don't know. You have to deal with a lot of crap.
Yeah, and what you also have to remember too is that if you're thinking about being a recruiter and you're looking at like your relationship with your own recruiter and you're like, oh, they've got it figured out, it seems pretty easy. Remember that most of the recruiters that you guys are working with have been in the industry a long time. They're the ones that made it, and they're the ones that are successful. And I think that it's very easy to not think about what the beginning of the job would be like when you're trying to form the relationships and you're trying to do these cold calls and you're going through a list. Like, some companies have they tell their new recruiters you need to call 200 people in a day. And like 99% of those calls go to voicemail, and it's just a complete waste of your time. You know that, the company knows that, the therapists don't even want to hear from you, and that's a miserable thing. The ones that you guys work with probably have a bunch of referrals being sent to them, and it's these leads that people really want to travel, and they're like eager to contact them. And so when you're starting out, it's not like that. You have to build up your reputation, you have to make these connections, and it's much different than a lot of therapists think it would be. Yeah.
So we're just providing the information. We definitely can understand if some people are thinking about leaving a clinical role to get into recruiting. And there are some therapists turned recruiters that we personally work with and are doing great and are loving it. And we know a lot of recruiters that love their jobs, but we just have heard so many over the years come and go because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. So hopefully we were able to shed some light on just like what it's like to be a recruiter, from what we understand. Obviously we're not recruiters ourselves, so we don't know all the ins and outs, but we've talked to a lot over the years. So whether or not that's the reason why you were interested in this topic, or even if you're just a therapist who is like wondering how your recruiter gets paid and all that, just realize like it's not that easy of a job. It's pretty tough sometimes, and I think most of them mean well, especially if you have someone that you were like referred to by someone else who also trusted them and worked well with them. Hopefully you have a good recruiter and they mean well, but every now and then you will find the scammy ones, the ones that you just like found from some random group or from a Google search. Maybe they're brand new, maybe they don't understand the industry yet, maybe they are out to get you and just try to make a lot of money. So there definitely are scammy ones out there, but most of the ones like that we work with and we've taken time to get to know and interview are, we hope, the good ones.
Yeah. One other thing I will say about pay that if anyone is interested in becoming a recruiter would be interested in is, since companies do things differently and their base pay is different and how they structure commissions are different, you have to remember that ultimately companies have very similar margins and numbers that they're shooting for. So if a company has a high base pay, then they're probably going to have a lower top end commission structure, meaning that if you have, let's say, $50,000 a year guaranteed, then probably you're not going to be able to go way higher than that if you have a lot of travelers on assignment, because the higher the commission, the lower the fixed payout that the company is willing to pay the recruiter. Whereas if it has a very low base pay, there's some companies that might pay $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year. Then usually their commission structure is much more generous, meaning that if you have 30 travelers on assignment, you'll make more with that company than you would with another company. Now there's pros and cons to that, obviously. Some people really appreciate the security of having a high base salary, and they don't care as much about like, oh, well, if I do really great, I can make more, but at least I have this security. I know I'm not going to go below that amount. Whereas other people really want to hustle and they want to be in one of those companies that has a low base pay, but they have a high potential to earn a lot of money. And so that's just something to think about as well. How the company structures pay and like what the base salary is going to affect how the commissions work.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to add, this particular video was specifically about like how much is the recruiter making, but this definitely leans into the question that a lot of people ultimately want to know is like, how much is the staffing company, including the recruiter and the company itself, like keeping from us, right? Because that's a very common concern among healthcare travelers, is that the company and the recruiter as a whole are keeping more money than they should. And there's a sentiment out there from a lot of healthcare travelers that we should be keeping a bigger piece of the pie because we're the ones doing all the work. And we definitely understand that sentiment, and we definitely have been there as well with that thought process. About a year ago, maybe, was it that you wrote an article about that? Jared wrote a long, in-depth article about all the things that the staffing company keeps money aside for, and we also did a video on that. So if you want to learn more in depth about that topic, I would really recommend that you go back and watch. I don't know if you can look up the name of that article.
It's something like, how much do travel therapy companies keep or something.
Yeah, so there's an article and a video. I would definitely recommend going and watching that. In there, we break down all the different reasons why the staffing company keeps money aside to pay their costs, like what does it mean when they have their overhead, and then the costs they pay on your behalf as a traveler, and all those sorts of things. And again, it's like, obviously, there are some recruiters who might be keeping too much, and maybe there are some staffing companies who are keeping too much. But in our opinion, overall, we feel like that's just kind of the cost of doing business, that we prefer to work through a staffing company, even though we know that they take a small cut of the pay. It takes a lot of the hassle and a lot of the liability off of us as travelers to let them do their job, and then let us do our jobs as clinicians. And we feel like we get that question a lot, where people are like, oh, wouldn't it just be better if we just negotiated our own contracts and worked as independent contractors and cut out the middleman? And it's like, well, maybe. But now you have to be the type of person who's also a business person and a therapist. And not all therapists are business people. not all clinicians want to go out of their way to learn how to negotiate contracts and carry their own liability insurance and carry their own health insurance and carry their own all the other things that you have to have. I can't think of off the top of my head right now. I have
liability and writing contracts and, you know, and also having an LLC and filing taxes.
Yeah, all those
things. There's a lot that goes into it.
Sorry, my brain is not working at 100% because we've been kind of sick. But anywho,
I was going to let you just struggle through it.
I know, thanks. Anywho, I would really recommend that if you want to dig deeper into this topic past just like, well, how much is the recruiter making, and dig further into that whole side of the scenario, if that's something that you've just been like racking your brain and you feel like really passionately that they're keeping too much, go and watch that video, go and read that article. What's it called, Jared?
How much of the pay does a travel therapy company keep on a travel contract?
And that's an article at traveltherapymentor.com. And then we also did a video that you can find on our podcast and our YouTube and our Facebook about that topic.
And we also wrote an article, well, the one that Whitney was talking about there, how much do they keep, that's a very in-depth. And the reason we're not like just giving out numbers is because it's extremely complex, as you might guess. That's like a 3,000 word article, but it's very detailed and breaks everything down. And then if you're thinking about doing your own contracts, we also wrote an article about that. It's like, should you pursue travel therapy as an independent contractor? And that goes through some of the math behind why it doesn't always make sense to even do it that way. Even when you account for additional hassle and things.
Yeah, we've definitely looked into it and considered it. And after having done all the research and ran all the numbers, we, after 8 years, still choose to work with staffing companies, even though, you know, at this point, it's like we know how it works and we could go out and like chase down our own contracts and do it ourselves and quote unquote cut out the middleman, but we still choose not to. Now there are some people that do, and again, if that's you, like go ahead and read those articles, decide if that's something that's really worth it to you. But I think for most therapists, it makes sense just to do your job as a clinician and let the staffing company and the recruiter do their job to help you get the contracts, and then it's just the cost of doing business. They keep some of that money aside, so they can make a profit, and then also they cover a lot of costs for you as well.
Yep. And then also this topic we're talking about tonight, recruiter pay, we also just have an article on that if you want to see that in written form with some links to other information. That's our most recent article in Travel Therapy Mentor.
Yeah, and when we get done with the Facebook Live video, I will put links in the comments to all these articles and the other video that we were talking about as well. But if you're just listening on the podcast or YouTube later, you can just go to traveltherapymentor.com and type in our search box. The search box for our website is pretty helpful if you just type in the keywords there, either the independent contractor article or the how much do the travel therapy companies make or how much do recruiters make. Type that in at traveltherapymentor.com and it'll come up for you.
Yep. All right, we'll go through some questions and comments. If you have any, leave those now and we'll answer them.
Yeah, if you're watching live, feel free to ask any questions in the comments now. Also, if you are watching live and you did learn anything from this, we would love if you'd hit that thumbs up button. We'd really appreciate it. Again, sorry that our voices are kind of raspy, been a little bit sick lately, but hopefully we were able to shed some light on this topic for you guys tonight.
Yep. Hey, Jonathan. Hey, Owen. Owen says, looking good, Jared. Thank you. We've actually, believe it or not, Whitney and I, since the beginning of the year, have lost a combined total of over 55 pounds. So, pretty cool. We've been working hard at it, although it's been intermittent, especially with getting sick and going on trips and stuff.
So Allie says, I love my recruiter. I've worked with her for over 4 years. I have done some short-term PRN jobs that I got for myself and some work at home in Australia when I was stuck there during COVID. But for the most part, she has managed some great deals for me and sniffs and always has my back. That's really great to hear, Allie. I'm glad you've had a good relationship with that recruiter over so many years. And I think I know which one you're talking about. I think I've seen you mention her name before, and she seems great. And Jonathan says, a good recruiter is priceless. We agree, Jonathan. A good recruiter can really make or break your experience as a healthcare traveler. We think that the recruiter is even more important than the company itself in most cases. So
yeah, and a really interesting thing to think about. I'm sure a lot of you guys are in various travel therapy groups or forums or things like that for travel therapy. And the question always comes up like, what company is the best? And everybody has a different answer. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. One is because there's no one size fits all for companies. But two, it's because so much of your experience with a company is shaped by the recruiter. Like very little interaction with the company goes through anybody but the recruiter. So if you have a great recruiter, you think the company's great. If you have a terrible recruiter, you think that the company's terrible. Like that's why a lot of the opinions you get from people are not great, because their opinion is completely shaped by a very narrow experience. And usually they've only worked with one or two, so they're only choosing between maybe two. Whereas, for us, we've interviewed several dozen at this point, different companies, and over 100 recruiters.
Yeah, and with that said, if you guys are watching this and you are looking for a great recruiter, you can feel free to visit our website and fill out our recruiter recommendation form at traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters, or you can comment recruiter on this video and we'll send you the link. We have taken the time over the years to interview dozens of recruiters, probably more.
Dozens of companies,
and probably over 100 recruiters, would you say?
Yep.
At this point, and we'll take a look at your specific preferences and recommend a few to you personally based on what you're looking for, based on like the setting and the location and what's important to you in terms of like communication and all those types of things. So if you are looking for some good recruiters, we can try to help you out there. Again, that's the recruiter recommendation form on our website.
Yep. All right. I don't think we have any questions, so hopefully this was informative. I see always a lot of speculation about recruiters and people asking about if they should become recruiters or how the process works, but it seems like people are usually just guessing or speculating. So hopefully providing some numbers will give you guys some insight and try to determine if it's something that you'd actually want to do, or maybe you were just curious about how recruiters get paid or how much they make, which is very common as well. But yeah, if you have any questions after this video, or you have any suggestions for videos, you can leave those in the comments. We always go back and check the comments on prior videos, so we'll see those as well.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, our wedding is coming up in 2 weeks, and then we are going on a honeymoon, and we haven't really announced this officially yet, but I'll announce it because you guys are here and you're, a special audience. So we are going to Europe, and we'll be gone for 10 weeks on our honeymoon, and we're starting in Switzerland. And then from there, we're going to a couple of countries on our way up to the Nordic countries, which we've never been to before. So we're super excited. So I'm not sure exactly what our video and podcasting schedule is going to be like over that time period. It's going to kind of depend on our Wi-Fi and our availability. I know our first 2 weeks in Switzerland are going to be crazy, and the next 2 weeks from right now leading up to our wedding are going to be crazy. So we might try to squeeze in
We'll probably do one more
video before we go, but I can't make any promises because we're a little bit busy. So stay tuned. We'll see. But if not, if we don't see you on the videos or on the podcasts in the next few weeks, then definitely check us out on Instagram. We will be sharing lots of pictures and videos from our time throughout Europe. So excited about Switzerland, so excited about the Nordic countries. Should be some amazing views and pictures, and I know those are bucket list places for a lot of you guys. So definitely follow us on Instagram if you're not already, because that's where I'll post a lot of the pictures from like our day-to-day. And we're just at Travel Therapy Mentor on Instagram.
Seems like every long trip we take like this is better than the last, so we're very optimistic that this is also going to be a really cool trip. We've been saving a lot of these countries because they're so expensive, and then now we got to bite the bullet and go. So
yeah, we're going to splurge because it's our honeymoon, our 10-week honeymoon. So yeah, just the first couple weeks that we've already booked in Switzerland are looking pretty pricey, but it should be amazing. And then last little quick announcement is we will be doing that sale on our course this weekend for Memorial Day weekend. So if you are interested in signing up for the course at the best discount, check out that sale this weekend.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.
All right. Good night.
Take care.